I started using Edulastic last year when I was in a hybrid situation, and I really enjoyed using it with the math capabilities that it had and the graphing things I could do. So I pulled a whole bunch of different examples that I have used in the last couple weeks, and I know there's a lot more out there on the capabilities of the graphs on Edulastic. So in this one, they're just looking at adding integers, and then they drag and drop those values on the left onto the number line where the correct answer would be. Last year, I created a question, and that was a chore, but I eventually figured it out. And I created this question because I couldn't find anything to do a two variable inequality. And so I found out quickly that I could put the two different lines on there, and the kids could decide between the lines, whether it was solid or dotted, and then they could graph the solution set. So I have walked through that process on here. So the students would go and select the line that they want, the solid or the dotted. And if you go to the next slide, they would graph that on the coordinate plane, and then they would have to decide where the solution set would be. And after they do that, they click on solution set, and they click on the left or right hand side that they would like to be shaded. Next slide, please. And so here, Edulastic is great because it would be able to grade this, and you can set up different methods of grading. So if you want alternate, if they had chosen the wrong line segment, you could give them half the points. If they had chose the wrong side of the graph, you could choose some alternate ways of grading. And so it was an easy way, once I got it set up, for Edulastic to do all my grading. And I just had to look and see where the student misconceptions were. From this, then I created a little bit more complex graph on the next slide. And so I had two inequalities. And so I had double the lines and the solution set. And so students were able to graph this and choose where they overlap. Next slide, please. So it would look like this, and I was able to see this whether my students were in class or distance, and it really helped me to understand what the students knew and what they didn't know, and I didn't have to look at pictures of their homework and things like that. I have not used Edulastic for assessments. I've primarily used it for homework, but I have students are able to learn this software pretty quickly, and I really enjoyed that part of Edulastic. The other type of graphs that I have used is the ones like this, where they have to translate the triangle, either I use it in my 8th grade curriculum or in my geometry. And so students are able to draw that out online, and they can check their answer if you have an premium account with Edulastic. Some pros and cons with graphing is students are able to make fairly complex graphs, and there are many different types of graphs available. They're easy to access, especially when you have remote students. But I have found a couple formatting errors. Sometimes the student's answer looks almost identical to the answer key, and it is counted incorrect. So I have had to go back and manually override those. And then I have also found it a little bit tricky to create, but there are plenty of answers or questions and tests already created in the banks. The other type of thing I wanted to talk about today was scaffolding. I have found that the scaffolding on Edulastic is awesome for kids who just need a little bit more help. I typically throw 2 or 3 of these types of questions in any one of my assignments. And so here they ask them for the y-intercept and the slope before they ask for the equation of the line. Another example would be looking at what your starting value is on an exponential equation before you go into writing your equation, and then before you have to evaluate your equation. So it takes a question and it breaks it into multiple parts. And so kids can figure it out step by step instead of just asking the last question. So here you can also do it when you are looking at linear or exponential, and this one used drop boxes instead of just text boxes. So there's a lot of ways you can do it. I have really enjoyed the proofs in geometry. It's my first year teaching geometry, and so the next slide, please. So this just being able, the kids don't have to come up with the reasons, but they just drag it and drop it into the boxes. It has really helped just so that students can get to know a proof instead of just having them create it from scratch. A few other examples that we just went over recently. Here they have drop down boxes for A, C, and D, whereas B they have to write in the equation. Next slide. They're asking for the slope of the line given and then the reciprocal, the negative reciprocal for step 2, and then the equation. And I love that Edulastic understands math and it knows that point slope form is the same as slope intercept form and equivalent equations. There is a box to click if you do not want them to understand, or if you want a student to type it in a particular form. In one of my 7th grade classes this last week, we did the next example where they had to identify the steps before they solved it. And then the last one is more of a two-way table in statistics. The next slide, please. And so there's multiple questions here and there's multiple blanks, and it's able to ask multi-part questions. Pros for scaffolding questions on Edulastic: students for the most part are more successful if they understand what each part is asking. Sometimes the wording might not be as clear as they need it, or they're not interpreting the question the same. Students tend to slow down more and spend more time on these questions. As I look at my graph and I assess just how long they're spending on it, they are spending a lot more time, and it can happen in many different ways, whether it was the drop down boxes, the drag and drop, the multiple choice, and things like that. Sometimes it can be a little tedious for some of my high flyers that find these questions difficult to understand because they're like, I already know how to get to the answer. I just want to get there. Sometimes it's so many blanks, so there's a lot of points, and not every question needs to be scaffolded. So that is kind of what I just wanted to talk about, and some of the things I really enjoyed using with math and Edulastic. Thank you.